Contingency reserve versus management reserve. Calculating reserve is a part of a project's risk management process. Basically, a project's risk management process starts with risk identification and qualification. Then proceeds with calculating the management reserve and contingency reserve. The project management body of knowledge, PMBOK, defines reserves as a provision in the project management plan to mitigate the cost and/or schedule risk. Contingency reserve. Contingency reserve is a fund added to the cost baseline against identified risks. They are used to develop risk response strategies and mitigate the effects of the known unknowns, or identified risks. Simply, we can say that contingency reserve is a planned amount of fund, time or resource which is added to an estimate for risks that might happen, also known as known unknowns. Contingency reserves are involved in the performance measurement baseline, and the project manager has the authority to use when any identified risk happens. Typically, the contingency reserve is a computable reserve that can be calculated by the help of techniques such as Monte Carlo simulation, decision tree analysis, and expected monetary value, etc. Don't forget that risk register plays a key role while calculating the contingency reserve of a project. Note that the contingency reserves are associated with those risks is not spent, and the project comes in before time and under budget. Management reserve. Management reserve can be defined as an amount of the project budget withheld for management control purposes. It is not a computable reserve and it is not a part of the cost baseline. In other words, it is a planned amount of fund, time or resource which is added to an estimate for unforeseeable situations, also known as unknown unknowns. These reserves are involved in the project's budget, but the project manager should get approval from the project sponsor in order to use it. It can be determined by using historical records, by taking into consideration the project complexity, and by recognizing customer nature. If you are preparing a complex project budget first time, you can assume management reserves 5% of the total project cost. But don't forget, it depends on many factors. Management reserve is used to develop risk response strategies against the unknown unknowns, or unidentified risks. Therefore, it cannot be used for schedule compression, gold plating, and covering cost overruns. Examples. For better understanding the difference between contingency reserve versus management reserve, let's look at the example. Assume that you are a project manager of a bridge construction project. 3 days ago, a storm demolished some parts of the bridge. As a project manager, you have the authority to use the contingency reserve to repair the demolished parts. Because this risk was defined in the risk management plan and a fund has been added for this situation. Your project is not on a known earthquake zone, so earthquakes are not considered as a risk, threat, to your project. But an earthquake happened last week and destroyed some parts of your bridge. As a project manager, you reported the event to your top management and asked their permission to use the management reserve to repair the destroyed parts. What are the key differences between contingency reserve and management reserve? The contingency reserve is a budget or time to be used to respond to known unknowns, or identified risks. On the other hand, management reserve is used to respond to unknown unknowns, or unidentified risks. The contingency reserve is a computable reserve that can be calculated by the help of techniques. Management reserve is not computable. It can be added as a percentage of total project costs, or duration. Since the contingency reserve is added to the cost baseline, the project manager has the authority to use it. However, the project manager must get approval to use the management reserve. The contingency reserve is a part of cost baseline, or schedule baseline, where management reserve is not a part of the cost or schedule baseline. Contingency reserve can be removed when the identified risk does not occur. However, management approval is required to remove the management reserve. Both types of reserves are used to manage identified and unidentified risks. Simply put, contingency reserve can be calculated by the help of techniques such as Monte Carlo analysis, decision tree analysis, and EMV, expected monetary value. On the other hand, it is not easy to estimate the management reserve. Mostly it can be thinkable as a percentage of the total project cost.